The hierarchy of the Ascended did not govern the stars. They simply existed above them. They had shed their biological needs and their fleeting passions millennia ago, ascending to a plane of pure, crystalline intellect. They communicated in equations, their movements dictated by optimal efficiency, and their ships were not built, but grown from pure dark matter energy fields, shimmering monoliths that dwarfed planets. Every species in the known galaxy, from the primitive Tikal to the sprawling bureaucratic federation of Xylos, referred to them with a mixture of terror and reverence, the gods. They never intervened, never negotiated, and never explained. They simply took what was necessary, often vast swaths of a nascent civilization's infrastructure or core resources, and moved on, leaving silence and obedience in their wake. Challenging them was not merely suicidal, it was an act of cosmic folly. They had been observing the species-designated humanity for several centuries. The humans were a baffling, illogical species prone to self-destruction and irrational bursts of creativity. Their development was chaotic, their technology a messy collision of theoretical brilliance and crude mechanics. Their only notable feature in the eyes of the Ascended was their resilience, a stubborn refusal to stop fighting long after the logical point of surrender had passed. When the Ascended arrived to harvest the energy core of Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, the humans reacted exactly as predicted. They screamed, they protested, and they launched their best naval fleet, a scattered collection of metal cans, directly into the path of the Sovereign, the Ascended harvesting vessel. The Ascended simply dissolved the human fleet with a passive energy field and continued their work. Humanity was dismissed as persistent noise, but the Ascended made one catastrophic error in their eternal calculus. They failed to account for rage. The destruction of the Jupiter fleet, the lives lost, the sheer indifferent arrogance of the Sovereign's action, it didn't crush humanity's will. It focused it. The human military structure dissolved, replaced by a single unified purpose driven by pure visceral vengeance. The greatest minds on Earth, the brilliant, chaotic engineers and physicists who usually squabbled over funding and patents, locked themselves away in a deep Earth facility beneath the shattered remains of what was once known as the American Midwest. They were given unlimited resources and a single chilling mandate: build a counter. What they built was not a fleet. It was a single monstrous vessel named the Legend Killer. Years passed. The Ascended, having completed their harvest, moved on to the next sector, assuming the tiny planet of Earth had settled back into fearful submission. They were wrong. One day, deep in the absolute void of interstellar space, a ripple appeared in the fabric of reality. It was not the smooth, elegant distortion of Ascended FTL travel. This was violent, messy, and loud. It was the sound of a universe being wrenched open by brute force. The Legend Killer arrived. It was unlike anything the Ascended had ever conceived. It was a battleship built not for elegance but for pure, brutal kinetic energy. Its hull was layered not with passive energy plating, but with kilometers of compressed synthetic diamond steel alloy, painted matte black to absorb stray light. It carried a crew of exactly 127 humans, all volunteers, all utterly insane with purpose. The ship did not even register on the Ascended's primary analysis matrices, which were calibrated to detect higher dimensional energy signatures. The human ship was too material, too physical. It was only when the Legend Killer began its run that the Ascended took notice. The target was the Nexus, the Ascended's largest, most vital command and archive structure, a colossal, torus-shaped habitat station orbiting a dead star, where billions of Ascended processors functioned in perfect harmony. The Legend Killer didn't fire lasers or plasma. It fired rocks. Specifically, it fired mass drivers the size of city blocks, accelerating depleted uranium slugs to nearly 0.99 C, 99% the speed of light. The impact was catastrophic. It was not a weapon of war. It was a cosmic hammer blow. The first few slugs, fired from a distance that should have rendered them harmless, shredded the outer atmosphere shielding of the Nexus. The Ascended processors registered the impact as an extreme environmental instability, not a targeted attack. Ascended Command Unit 803 Beta. Acknowledge extreme localized entropy event. Source unknown. Initiate defensive protocol Gamma. Defensive Protocol Gamma involved erecting massive, passive shielding against interstellar debris, but the Legend Killer was already closing the distance. The humans were not using FTL drives for travel. They were using them for maneuver. The massive ship would accelerate to near light speed, then use a controlled, violently unstable micro-jump to shed its momentum and reorient itself, allowing it to navigate like a fighter jet despite its size. This was technically possible but universally avoided by every species due to the 80% chance of tearing the vessel and the crew apart. But humans, the Ascended remembered with a cold shudder, did not value their own integrity. The Legend Killer closed to point-blank range, its main energy conduits powering up for the second phase of the attack. Captain Elias Vance, the human commander, stood on the bridge, his face illuminated by the raw, crackling energy display. He hadn't slept in 30 hours. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words. His only instruction to his crew had been given years ago. Do not stop until the Legend is dead. Target analysis. Lieutenant Kinsley, Vance rasped, his voice rough from disuse. Core structure exposed. Captain? Kinsley replied, her voice calm, utterly devoid of fear. The debris field from our kinetic barrage is reflecting their attempts at regenerating the shielding. We have a clear shot at the primary processing unit. Weapon status? Main cannon is charged. They're trying to send a diplomatic transmission, Captain. They're calling us irrational, unstable, and mathematically illogical. A faint, grim smile touched Vance's lips. Transmission denied. Fire the logic breaker. The Ascended, monitoring the incoming energy spike, finally recognized the danger. This was not a weapon. It was a supercharged gravity well generator housed inside a vessel, and it was aimed directly at their core. Ascended Command. Unit 803 Beta. Threat level. Critical. This is an attack vector based on absolute self-annihilation probability. Halt attack immediately. We will compensate humanity for past losses. The transmission was intercepted by the human ship's AI, a sarcastic personality named Archie. Archie, voice in Vance's ear. They're offering reparations, Captain. They just noticed we're about to make their library collapse into a black hole. Should I relay a counteroffer? Maybe Jupiter's moon's back? Vance, fire. The logic breaker released its energy. It was a contained, localized singularity, designed to exist for less than a second, just long enough to tear a hole in the space-time fabric around the Nexus's core. The Ascended's elegant, efficient systems had no counter for such a savage, wasteful display of pure destructive force. Their defense protocols were designed to neutralize threats. They were not designed to stabilize a self-inflicted cosmic wound. The Nexus, the colossal symbol of the Ascended's power, began to shudder. Not a collapse, but a graceful, horrifying inward folding. The black monoliths that formed the Ascended fleet finally reacted, abandoning their stations and racing toward the dying Nexus, not to attack the human ship, but to save their archives. They were saving data, not waging war. This was the second great error of the Ascended. They prized information and immortality over martial dominance. The humans, who embraced both ignorance and death, exploited this weakness perfectly. Vance watched the Ascended fleet scatter, their perfect crystalline forms suddenly marred by frantic, chaotic movement. They're ignoring us. Captain, Kinsley murmured, her eyes wide with awe. They're saving the library. They're saving the data. They called themselves gods, Vance said, watching the Nexus fold into nothingness. But they are just librarians who got mugged by a species that doesn't read the rules. The mission was complete. The legend was broken. The Ascended, for the first time in their reign, were no longer unchallenged, no longer perfectly secure. Vance issued the final, chilling order to his crew. Primary escape jump. Target, deep void. We're going dark. The Legend Killer executed another violent micro-jump, disappearing in a flash of raw, ripping energy. The remaining Ascended fleet, their massive Nexus gone, did not pursue. They couldn't. They were too busy stabilizing the surrounding gravitational field and trying to calculate the mathematical probability of an enemy employing a weapon with a 99% self-destruction rate. They looked at the debris field, the remnants of the human kinetic slugs, the raw, unsophisticated materials of the attack, and finally understood. They had dismissed humanity as noise. But noise, when amplified to a cosmic scale, becomes destruction. They had been certain of their divinity, their immunity, their logical superiority. They had been certain they were gods and humanity, in a single, crude, brilliant, and completely irrational act of vengeance, had sent a ship to prove that no matter how advanced, no matter how cold and efficient, no one is immune to a species that is willing to lose everything just to win the argument. The legend of the Ascended died that day, not with a bang of complex equations, but with the shuddering, primitive shock of a human-designed kinetic projectile. The new legend, the terrifying Ilog.